Hello and welcome to Alternate Dimensions Zendikar Rising Set Review. In tonight's video, we're going to explore the green cards that I believe will be playable in constructed formats, particularly Standard, Pioneer, and Modern. For those who have not seen the other videos in our series, my name is Brad. I am the owner of Alternate Dimensions in Tullahoma, Tennessee. We deal in Magic, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, board games, D&Ds, D&D books, and all accessories. Come on by and check us out sometime. Magic is my jam, though. I've been playing Magic since 1996. And I've seen a lot of sets, I've seen a lot of broken cards, I've seen a lot of fun environments, I've seen a lot of terrible environments. So, but Zendikar Rising sort of gives a new feel after the last year worth of extremely powerful cards. This has a much different feel to it, and I'm glad to see that at least they were Wizards was conscious of thinking of that. So with the green cards, again, I will highlight the cards that are just mostly for draft. I'll go into explanation on the ones that I feel are constructed playable. So first up is Adventure Awaits, 2-mana sorcery, common. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card from among them, put it in your hand. The rest go on the bottom of your library in a random order. If you didn't put a card into your hand this way, draw a card. So we've seen these type of effects before. Typically they're sorcery speed in green. Sometimes they get a land, sometimes they get a land or creature, a creature in enchantment, etc. This is the first one that I can remember that lets you look at the top 5, and if you can choose not to reveal a creature among them. If you're looking for something specific, put all of them on the bottom in a random order and then draw a card instead. So literally you're going 6 cards deep. Other than Collected Company, I don't know of a card that saw a ton of standard play that lets you dig that far into your deck with a green card other than a tutor. Now this one doesn't quite have the flexibility of some of the other ones. But it is a strong common. You're definitely going to play this in limited. If you're in green or yeah, it's dig for my bomb rare creatures. Yes, please. In a 40 card deck, this is 1/8 of your deck. Or if you're digging 6 cards deep, it's a little more than that. So standard. This card has potential to be played in standard. I don't necessarily think it will be on anything but mid-range, ramp, and control strategies. Unless there's a combo deck of some sort. Combo decks, this screams I'm looking for a creature part of a combo. As far as older formats, with it not hitting anything but creatures, I think it will be difficult for it to see play in Modern. Could see some play in Pioneer based on how the format shakes out. But I see Standard being the biggest format to use this card. Alright, next up is one of the green mythics, Ancient Green Warden. 6 mana for a 5/7 elemental with reach. You may play lands from your graveyard, and if a land enters the battlefield that causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So obviously that ability was designed for landfall. But there's other, there's other triggered abilities that can be used here. So, Radiant Fountain, which was a reprint in Core Set 2021, is a land that enters the battlefield. You gain 2 life. This would trigger that ability the second time, and so you gain 4 life. And that's just an example. But primarily, it is there for landfall. Most of the landfall creatures are designed to be aggressive. They're not. They're not designed. They're not. Most of those are not designed for mid to late game use. There are some. There's several multicolor legendary creatures that this ability, being able to do this ability, would be very powerful. And funny enough, both of those creatures have green in it. Being able to play lands from your graveyard is also very useful, particularly in formats, in older formats where you had fetch lands, where you could recur fetch lands. But you can also recur things like Field of Ruin, which is in Theros Beyond Death, to keep your opponent off of specific lands with powerful abilities. You can also do it in older formats with things like Ghost Quarter. Probably not going to see Legacy play based on its converted mana cost, so we don't have to worry about Wasteland entering the chat. So the question is, what shell does he go in? I'm not 100% sure what shell he's going to go in. I've looked at a few interesting decks from the deck spam before the early access event, but I've been trying not to look at too many of the green decks because for the past year I've been sick of seeing green, and 10 years ago, I don't think I'd ever hear myself say that. Between Nissa and Uro and Hydroid Krasis and Once Upon a Time and Oko, moving along. Ashaya, Soul of the Wild. So, 5 mana legendary elemental, mythic, power and toughness equal to the number of lands you control. Non-token creatures you control are forest lands in addition to their other types. So the first thing that is painfully obvious is when this creature is on the battlefield, all of your non-token creatures, when they enter the battlefield, will also trigger your landfall abilities. Which I will admit I missed the first time. The second thing is by turning all of your non-token creatures into forest forest lands, they also turn off all of your opponent's cards that target that are forced to target non-land permanents. Even though that a card is a creature, um, if it is also a land, you can't target it with things like abrupt decay. Um, you also get to do some terrible shenanigans with Cyclonic Rift. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, or if you paid the override cost, return all non-land permanents to its owner's hand. Okay, I'll bounce your board. My board's here. So if you thought you were sick of playing green and blue, or sick of seeing those two colors in the same deck, you may see it again. My bet is now. So before I say that, obviously, it does also make all your land destruction spells very good to deal with your creatures. So you have to be careful in that regard. So like if you go back to modern, let's say, not that I don't think this card will see modern play based on just what we know alone, but you've got Ghost Quarter and you have Field of Ruin that deal with your creatures in that format. You also have Molten Rain, Stone Rain. The list is ridiculous. So that's one reason I don't see it going any farther back than Pioneer. But it does add an interesting dynamic that I don't think is. I've never seen this ability on a creature before. So it's certainly the first time I've ever seen anything like it. Again, you'll notice that at one time I was a competitive player. I enjoyed going to major tournaments. I enjoyed going to PTQ circuit and traveling around. As I had gotten older, now that I own a game store, it's next to impossible to get away. Plus, I care for my 87-year-old grandmother, and that makes leaving to go to a tournament for a whole weekend impossible. So while I help our players that want to grind, that want to do those things at my store, who want to go out and represent and try to make their mark in competitive Magic, while I'm still a Spike and I like, we all like to win, right? But all my decks have some Johnny Jankness to it. Sometimes I like to build a Timmy deck, and I want my big creatures. So, that being said, this will be interesting to play with, both from a Johnny side of things and a Timmy side. Alright, Broken Wings, 3 mana, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying. Again, this is a card with lots of options. More than likely, this falls to being a sideboard card. There are many cards like this, although I don't think there's one that deals with artifacts, enchantments, or creatures with flying. I think this is the first that melds all three of those as options. So if you're not going to be dealing with if you don't feel like you're going to be dealing with flyers, or you're not going to be dealing with artifacts, there may be another card that you can slot in. Um, but it's definitely sideboard material, but one that gives you good options. All right, Canopy Bailoff. That's a 4/3 for 3 and a green. When a land ETBs, this gets +2/+2 till end of turn. So it's a solid common for limited. A 6/5 is for the single landfall trigger is really good. I think they did a good job of costing and hitting these at the right spot. I don't expect this one to see standard or constructed play. I'll just put it that way. You want most of your landfall creatures to be low to the ground and hit hard early. And I don't think this one. I think turn 4 is a little slow. You want, realistically, you want about half their life total gone by turn 4 if you're a low to the ground aggressive deck. And I think most of the time you'd rather be playing multiple spells. On turn 4 rather than a singular spell that might help finish him on the next turn. Alright, next up, Clay Bailoff. 5 double green for a 6/6 beast. Has kicker of 2 and a green. This spell can't be countered. Has hexproof and haste. And if he was kicked, it enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. Well, this is about the size of a Mack truck. 6/6 for 7, perfectly reasonable, with hexproof, haste, and can't be countered. Nuts that you get all that for that low cost. The kicker's 4 extra counters, so it would be 10 mana for 10/10 hexproof, haste, and can't be countered. Obviously, its standout problem is it gets chump blocked all day. But if they ain't got nothing left on the board, you can easily finish a player off. I don't expect to see a lot of this card, but I do expect to see, 1, maybe 2 copies. Something in the ramp deck to kill you out of nowhere. Not that Ugin can't already do that. Wipe your board, then +3 the next turn, or +2 and bolt you for 3. Yeah, but I expect to see a little of this card. I have a feeling it's overcosted to the point that it's not playable in Pioneer, and it's absolutely not playable in Modern, even with those abilities. Alright, Dauntless Survivor. So 2 mana 1 ETBs, you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. We talked about in previous videos where there's a +1/+1 counter theme. And while some of the other cards are very good and it's going to fit in a great archetype, this common is just a little on the weak side. And I don't expect this one to see any play. This one is a limited card only. Gnarled Colony, 2 mana, 2/2 beast with kicker, 2 and a green. If it was kicked, you enters the battlefield with 2+1/+1 counters on it, and each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has trample. Now this, despite being a small, cheap common, is what I expect. So it's a 2/2 for 2 that gives the blanket ability that every creature with a +1/+1 counter on it has trample. And you can kick it, so basically 5 mana for a 4/4 with trample. Hey. So this one's worth experimenting with, giving trample to a lot of your massively big creatures that normally can't get by things. Is a decent ability, because they'll sit there and chump block you all day till they draw the wrath your board. You got nothing left, and now you got to rebuild, and it dang near impossible against control decks. So you want to be able to get as much damage through as you can, and this one gives you options of a 2/2 or a 4/4 with trample. Inscription of Abundance, 2 mana instant with a kicker of 2 and a green. Choose one, or if the spell was kicked, choose any number instead. Put 2+1/+1 counters on target creature. Target player gains X life, where X is the greatest power among creatures they control. Target creature you control fights target creature you do not control. So this is another one of the inscription cards. I like this one a lot. 2 of the 3 choices are great. Obviously, the 2+1/+1 counters on a creature and the fight are both fantastic abilities on the same card. So it's actually worth 5 mana just for those 2. The gain X life is nominal. It's good to have in certain aggressive matchups where you need it. It kind of reminds me of Dramoka's Command, because I believe that one puts counters on a creature and also has a fight as a choice, and that's sort of where I'm looking at. And obviously that one was 2 mana, where this is, if you wanted both of those, it would be 5. But instant speed fight is great, and being able to pump up on your creatures is great, and if you get the life gain, fine. So yeah, I expect to see a little bit of standard play for this one. Especially the 2 mana instant portion is fine. You can play this easily in most decks. The 5 mana, probably not going to kick it too often, but I could see you being able to really mess with your opponent by being able to kick it in the mid game, where you make one creature big, you kill off their biggest creature, you gain a decent amount of life, 4 to 6 points, and nullify their attack, and then kill them on the crackback. Alright, Iridescent Horn Beetle, 5 mana for a 3/4. Beginning of an end step, create a +1/+1 insect creature token for each +1/+1 counter you've put on creatures under your control this turn. So that can be a lot of tokens that you're going to be putting into play. Seems like a decent card. My bet is this is a limited build, one of those build around cards that hey, you're playing a +1/+1 counter theme. We could swarm the board easily with this out. And there's even a nice, excuse me, a nice combo um, with a white rare from earlier that where you're making 2/2 cat beasts or putting a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control and giving them vigilance till end of turn. Um, and it's a 4-drop into this, so I could see some dirty plays with that. Uh, but my my guess here is relegated to 100 card constructed decks and 40 card decks. Jiraga's Visionary, 4 mana for a 3/2 Elf Wizard, draw a card. Um, Too expensive to end up in an Elf combo deck in any format that I'm aware of. So relegated to limited, but that's a fine card for limited. Kazandu Nectarpot, 2 mana for a 1/3. It's an insect. When a land ETBs, you gain life. Um, that is a fine ability. On a small, non-aggressive creature, you would. The only way I could see this seeing any sort of standard or pioneer play is if you wanted a repeatable life gain. And while Veto is probably the deck that you're looking for, you want that deck to be white-black and not green-black. So, more than likely into the limited binder. Alright, Kenzandu Stomper. 5 and a green for 6/5 Trampler. When it enters the battlefield, return up to 2 lands you control to their owner's hand. So normally I don't talk about big, cheap creatures that common being constructed playable. However, in the landfall deck, so this can be playable in two different scenarios. The landfall deck wants to be able to replay lands later on in the game. It wants to draw its threats and have a good mix of lands so that it can play out all its spells. When you get into the late game, you need top decks that are relevant. If you're drawing creatures and not lands in your landfall deck, you need a way to do some get some extra landfall triggers to sort of push through. The Stomper allows you to do that. Yes, it's setting you back up to 2 lands. But if you're at like 8 or 9 lands, you flooded, then being able to bounce 2 back to your hand is not terrible. Because it lets you replay a land for that turn, play another land out next turn, getting multiple triggers of landfall, so you can try to push through the rest of those damage. Plus, the body is not irrelevant. A 6/5 for 6 mana with trample. The other thing that is very interesting is the fact, of course, the modal double face cards that we have in this set are double faced. So if you've played one as a land early, and now you really want the spell side, whether it's an instant, a sorcery, or the creature, a card like the Stomper here lets you return some of those enter the battlefield tapped lands to your hand that has a spell on the other side that you want to cast. I think that's where these cards will be invaluable and probably needs to be looked at a little more than we would normally think of a card like this. Normally we'd see this as a setback, right? Now you don't have to return any lands if you don't want to. Um, I remember seeing some of the older cards I played during the first Zendikar block. I didn't play standard or the second Zendikar block, but I remember seeing some of these cards like this. You were forced to return them. The ones nowadays actually give you the choice. Uh, so you actually get this with no drawback, and if you return the lands to your hand, you have a major reason to do so. That's also another reason the double face cards are fantastic for this set. So don't knock this guy. I would expect to see some of him at least in a standard deck near you. All right, let's talk about the best rare in the set. This is a reprint. So if you did not get the chance to play with Lotus Cobra during the original Zendikar block, boy, were you missing out. Now, in that set, it was a mythic instead of a rare. They have downshifted it to a rare. It was also a rare in Iconic Masters. Um, by the way, the artwork on this one is beautiful. Um, but I digress. This is the best, in my opinion, this is the best rare in the set. We know what it does. That's probably the reason that they didn't reprint fetch lands um, in this set. Because we have Evolving Wilds in Ikoria, and then we have Fable Passage that was in Throne and Core Set 2021. So, that gives you up to 8 fetch lands in which to be able to trigger landfall twice in the same turn. Um, and there's other ways to do it as well. But between this, Cultivate, trying to rack my brain on the 4 mana sorceries that search for 2 basics and put them in the battlefield tapped. You're trying to ramp up to something massive. Most of those decks are trying to ramp up to Ugin. But there's other creatures. There's other cards, right? Elder Gargaroth is is a great 5-drop. If you play this on 2, um, play on 3, 4. Yeah, he's not gonna let you play him on. Yeah, I'm a little off on my math, but so as far as ramping goes, this guy gets you the color of mana that you need when you need it. Helps fix your mana, helps you ramp into to better cards, more powerful cards. So there was an old article way back in the day on a site called the Dojo. And there was an article that asked the question, Bolt the Bird. Of course, the bird is Bird of Paradise. During the early days of the game, Bird of Paradise was a rare in Alpha, Beta, Unlimited, Revised, 4th Edition, 5th Edition, 6th Edition. It was a standard 1 mana, 0/1 flyer, tap, add 1 mana of any card to your mana pool. And the article was called To Bolt the Bird or Not to Bolt the Bird. Um, and it also referred to other one drops that tapped for mana. In this case, Land of War Elves or Finehorn Elves, which were the 3 one drops that actually ramped you into 3 mana on turn 2. Um, red decks, particularly, normally don't want to point its burn at creatures. It normally wants to point it at the player's head. Um, that's subject to questionability. Um, it wants to get you dead as fast as possible. But there are cards like Lotus Cobra, like Birds of Paradise, Land of War Elves, that you simply cannot let live. Your opponent may have kept a hand that's a little sketchy. They've kept 2 lands. Let's say I'll make this as an argument: 2 forests, a Land of War Elves or Bird of Paradise, and everything else in their hand is. It's got 2 3-mana spells, a 4-mana spell, and a 5-mana spell. So he's banking on, if this creature lives on turn 2, I'm going to get to play my 3-mana spell. My 3-mana spell gets me another land, so the next turn I'll be able to cast my 4-mana spell. And so on. The reason they're playing a creature at that converted mana cost is so that they can effectively move up an additional mana on the next turn. So in other words, don't let it live. Bolt the bird, bolt the elf, bolt the Lotus Cobra. Do not let your opponent untap with this thing. It's not good for you. Particularly in the early game. If you're looking turn 2 through turn 6 or 7, you're this guy could ruin your day. If you're at like turn 15, he's going to be a 2-1 attacker, and that's about it. But yeah, if you see it early, since shock is in a standard, shock it. Don't let it live. All right, Might of Murasa. 2-mana instant kicker, 2 and a green. A target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn. If the spell was kicked, it gets +5/+5 until end of turn. Again, obligatory giant growth with an upside. These pump effects are typical in green. Unless somebody has found a broken kicker deck for standard or something older that I'm completely unaware of, this is a great limited trick and nothing more. Murasa Brute, 3/3 for 3, Troll and Warrior. Otherwise, a bunch of flavor text. Murasa Sproutling, 2 and a green for a 3/3, plant elemental with kicker 1 and a green. If it entered the battlefield, if it was kicked, return target card with a kicker ability from your graveyard to your hand. Okay, so being able to return a card from your graveyard to your hand is a strong ability. There's a long history of those cards in green. Restricting it to a card with a kicker ability makes this one, an awkward version of regrowth on a stick. Unless your deck is chock full of kicker cards, or you have a number of them that have strong effects that you want to play, like the inscription we saw earlier. This is probably not going in your deck. and we'll so in other words, fringe playability based on the kicker mechanic. Um, Limited, if particularly in draft, if you drafted this deck, this is a great card for that deck. Nissa's Zendikar, 3 and a green for enchantment aura enchant land. Enchanted Land is a 4/4 elemental creature with reach and haste. It is still a land. When Enchanted Land dies, return that card to its owner's hand. So there was a number of these back in original Zendikar. Most of those were a lot cheaper. They made creatures of varying sizes. I actually think the green one last time was 4 and a green. They made a 6/4. Um, um, this one is a straight limited card. I don't see this one hitting any constructed decks. This isn't Nissa Who Shakes the World, unfortunately. Alright, Oran Reef Ooze. 2 and a green for a 2/2. Rare Ooze. When it ETBs, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Whenever it attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature with a +1/+1 counter on it. So that counters deck that I talked about when we were going over some of the white cards as well as some of the black cards that overlap into this with Conclave Mentor and Wirewood Worm. Yeah, this one slots right in the deck. It lets you you've got Stone Cold Serpent at 1. You've got Conclave Mentor or Luminarch Aspirant at 2. You've got or Wirewood Worm at 2. You've got this on 3. You're going to put a lot of power on the board. It's going to do some nutty things and really quickly. So, yeah, prepare for that deck. Now, again, that deck's competitiveness will be determined based upon if the metagame is heavy 1-for-1 removal spells where you almost have nothing on the board and can't keep anything on the board. But I played a deck very similar to this in the previous format with Watley's Raptor, with Pelt Collector, with Knight of Autumn. So there was a number of them that had the +1/+1 counter themes that also had other craziness. So yeah, I expect the decks to continue to flow. Rabid Bite. Okay, this is a reprint. Lets you basically hit a creature for your creature's power. I've seen this played in standard decks before. And certainly could slot in. Green's best removal card in limited by far. Reclaim the Wastes. 1 green sorcery with kicker 3. Search your deck for a basic land, reveal it, put it in your hand, shuffle your library. If it was kicked, you get to get 2 basic lands instead of 1. So it doesn't ramp you, but it does get them out of the deck. So it lets you dictate when you can play the basic lands. To me, this feels more like a limited card. But being able to set up landfall triggers for multiple turns. It might see some standard play. Um, there are normally there can be better effects in older formats than this one, so I wouldn't push it past standard. Roiling Regrowth. So 2 and a green, instant, sacrifice a land, search your library for 2 basic lands, put them on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. So this is a redone version of a card called Harrow. Harrow has the same casting cost, is also an instant, was originally printed in Tempest, but it's worded as an additional cost, sacrifice a land. And then search your library for up to 2 basic lands, put them on the battlefield, and then shuffle your library. So you get the lands untapped with Harrow, but you're forced to sacrifice the land as you cast the spell. So this one, you can cast the spell, wait to see if it resolves, then sacrifice the land and do the rest. So you're not risking the land, which I think is designed for multiple reasons. You don't want a bad feels by reprinting Harrow and having that happen again. So it's a semi-ramp spell, as well as getting to trigger multiple landfall triggers in the same turn. It's also real good when your opponent tries to destroy one of your non-basic lands that will also get exiled when it gets hit, and you can just get rid of the land in response, so it's not there, and then end up with +1 net mana the next turn. Scale the Heights, 3 mana sorcery, 3 mana sorcery common. Put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature. You gain 2 life. You may play an additional land this turn. Draw a card. So first of all, why not just reprint Explore? It's 1 mana less. It's 1 mana less. Lets you play an additional land this turn. Draw a card. I feel like they're stapling so many additional effects on a card that we just can't ignore it anymore. This one has so many different themes going on for it. So the +1/+1 counter fits the counter stack with the Conclave Mentor. The life gain is just there to help you stabilize, and the rest of the game text is there for decks that want to ramp and decks that are there for landfall. I keep staring at this card thinking, they're just trying to do too much on the same card. I mean, you're actually getting great value for 3 mana with all of that game text, but I just don't see it fitting in any format other than limited, because we already have Cultivate. And we've already got the 4 mana ones, and I don't think you'll ever play this one over those if you're looking to ramp. Alright, Scoot Swarm. 2 and a green for a 1/1 insect rare. It has a landfall. When a land ETBs under your control, create a 1/1 green insect token. If you control 6 or more lands, create a token that's a copy of Scoot Swarm instead. Okay, I will say I underestimated this card just a little bit. Um, 3 mana for a 1/1 is not a good rate, right? 3 mana for a 1/1 that makes 1/1 insects. Um, Still seems a little lackluster. 3 mana for a 1/1 that makes copies of itself, and then the next landfall trigger makes copies of itself, gets out of hand super quick. And the reason I've been looking at this card for a while, but when I watched the SCG versus live, I got to see this thing in action when it was left unimpeded for a couple of turns, and there seemed like there was 50 tokens on the board in a blink of an eye. So I'm actually glad that they didn't cost this as like a 2 mana or a 1 mana, because holy crap, that board got gummed up real quick. So if you like your tokens, and you like making copies of Scoot Swarm that make more copies of Scoot Swarm that just exponentially breed on the battlefield, you're going to love this card. Alright, so this is another one of the equipments. Sky Clay Pickaxe, 1 green. When it ETBs, you get to auto-attach it to a target creature you control. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, equipped creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Has equip of 2 and a green. So Adventure Gear was a common from original Zendikar. It was 1 mana equipment. It also had a landfall trigger. Landfall trigger did the same thing. I want to say its equip cost was, it's either 1 or 2. I don't remember. So they've basically put this in a color, given you a free equip, and increased the equip cost by like 1 mana. So if you're in a landfall deck, or you're in an aggressive deck, being able to auto-equip this to a creature for 1 mana, play your land for turn, potentially, if you're playing a landfall deck, your creature gets a trigger, this gets a trigger, etc. More if you have our Fable Passages. You're going to feel like the pickaxes hit you in the head. This is a solid addition to aggressive decks, particularly aggressive landfall decks. It's a great card in limited. I remember having Adventure Gear in. I had Adventure Gear. I had Trusty Machete, and I'm trying to think. I had 3 pieces of equipment. It might have been the boots that was non-basic Landwalk. I had like 3 pieces of equipment in a sealed pool for original Zendikar for PTQ, and yeah, it got pretty ridiculous. Spring Mantle Cleric, 4 and a green for a 2/3 elf cleric, enters battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each color mana spent to cast it. So it's at least going to be a 3/4 because you paid a green to cast it. If you paid any other colors, it's going to be pretty dang big. Even with that ability, I really don't know if it. I really don't think it's playable in standard. So let's say you spent 5 mana on it. Spent Wooburg on it. So it's going to be +5/+5. It's going to be a 7/8 for 5 mana. Okay, that's a little bit above curve. Um, for a creature without evasion, the only thing is, I think more of the expensive 5, 6, 7, 8 mana spells are better overall than what this maximum could be. Uh, Interesting card for limited though. Strength of Solidarity. One green sorcery. Choose a creature you control. Put a +1/+1 counter on it for each creature in your party. Again, this falls under with the party mechanic. This one doesn't even auto guarantee that you'll even get a single +1/+1 counter on it, unless obviously your deck is built that way. In limited, you're gonna have some of each, but um, there's a better card that's more consistent that you'll see in just a minute as we go forward. Swarm Shambler, one green for a 0/0 fungus beast. Enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. When a creature you control becomes with a +1/+1 counter on it becomes target of a spell an opponent controls, create a 1/1 green insect token. One and tap, put a +1/+1 counter on Swarm Shambler. So here's another one drop for your token for your counters build that also incidentally makes more creatures when your opponent targets your creature with a spell. Um, and this thing even grows itself. So you can grow it, get extra counters with Conclave Mentor, give Wildwood Hydra. I think it's Hydra. Sorry guys, I've been sleep deprived for quite a while. Um, anyway, the Hydra out of Core Set 2021. Um, it'll get a counter. It'll get another counter um, from Conclave Mentor. So being able to just exponentially go nuts with these counters, you might want a full rack of dice to play that deck. But I will say the deck's kind of fun to play. Tajiru Blight Blade. I know they went with Rogue, but why couldn't have they went with Elf Ninja? That would have been freaking awesome. 1 mana, 1/1 Death Touch, Elf Rogue. Your limited fodder screenshot. Tajiru Paragon, 2 mana for a 3/2 elf that also counts as a cleric, a rogue, a warrior, and a wizard. So he can count as one of your missing party members. Kicker 3. When it ETBs, if it was kicked, reveal the top 6 cards of your library. You may put a card that shares a creature type with it from among them into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your deck in a random order. So, the first thing is, look at the art. Does this not remind you of Link? I mean, even the Seagate Bridge that's behind him, or her, or them, even looks like a section of Hyrule from Breath of the Wild. Anyway, off that tangent. So it's actually 2 mana for a 3/2 is above curve. That's beautiful. It's an elf, so it actually fits in an elf. It can fit in an elf deck. Because it's also aggressively costed. It fits in your party deck. It fits whatever party person that you're need or missing, and then it has a way to dig for one of the party members that you're missing. But don't sleep on the fact that it also searches for an elf. And that could be very important for some of the elf builds. I mean, 5 mana for 3/2 that digs for an elf. I don't think that's anything to sneeze at, particularly in Pioneer. Tajiru Caster. This is another elf rogue. 3 mana, 1/4 with reach. Into the box of commons you go. Taunting Arbor Mage, 3 mana for 2/3. Elf Wizard. It has Kicker 3, and if it was kicked when it enters the battlefield, all creatures able to block target creature this turn do so. So this is a fantastic combat, trick to really mess up with somebody's plan, particularly with the elf with Death Touch we just saw a minute ago. You throw that one under the bus, kill something big, and let the rest of your army through. Unfortunately, that is going to be reserved for limited. Territorial Skeeth Cat. 2 and a green for a 2/1 trample. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on this. So it's slightly overcosted, but it has a landfall trigger that can make it get out of hand. This one probably going to fall just a hair short of playable in standard. Depending on how many 3-drops you actually want to put in your deck in the counter stack. I don't know if it would fit nicely in a landfall deck, because you'll have to play this either early on turn 2, or you'll have to play it on turn 4 or later to be able to play a land and make it a 3/2, which is respectable based on its converted mana cost. Turn Timber Ascetic, 5/4 for 4 and a green. Giant Cleric. When it enters the battlefield, gain 3 life. Yeah, don't think that was fitting and constructed. Everything else is pretty good as far as limited goes. Vast Wood Surge. So this is another ramp spell at 4 mana. So sorcery. You search your library for up to 2 basic lands, put them on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle your library. It also has Kicker 4. If the spell was kicked, put 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. So it's either a 4 mana ramp spell, or it's an 8 mana ramp spell that puts a bunch of counters on your stuff. As much as I like the blanket, give all your stuff extra +1/+1 counters, I think the cycling version of this is better in the late game than the extra 4 mana kicker on this. I could be completely wrong, but that's where my mind goes with that one. Veteran Adventurer, 6 mana 5/5. Human. It also counts as each one of your party members. It costs 1 less for 2 casts for each creature in your party, and has vigilance. So green is the one that's trying to help most to fix your party because they have an uncommon and a rare that both count as each individual type. Again, don't know if that's constructed playable or not, but being able to get this for 2 less mana puts it above curve, and usually having 2 different classes of creatures is not going to be hard. Going after that might be much more difficult. Vine Gecko, 2 mana for a 2/2 elemental lizard. The first kicked spell you cast each turn costs 1 less to cast. Whenever you cast a kick spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Vine Gecko. So again, this is one of those cards that's a signpost card for limited. It's obviously for kicker, but it also fits in your +1/+1 counter deck. Again, I don't. Just looking over the kicker cards, I don't see it as a constructed playable deck. And I definitely have to look back at older cards to see if this would even be worth attempting in older formats, because now you're playing an underpowered card that might give you some value, and that's going to be tricky to pull off consistently. Alright, now we're going to get to the double face cards. So the first double face card right out the bat, to me, is an instant play. Ballad Recovery is 2 and a green sorcery, return target card from your graveyard to your hand, and the back is an ETB land that taps for green. So the reason I say this is an auto play, in my mind, Regrowth was a spell that at one time, if I'm not mistaken, it was actually a banned card. Way back in the early days of Magic. It was 2 mana sorcery that did the same thing. Return a card from your graveyard to your hand. So this one costs 1 more. You never want to play this card early, right? You're not going to have enough cards in your graveyard. There's probably nothing there that you want to bring back, or very little. So you have the option of playing it as a land. Late game, if you draw this card, the land's going to be almost always terrible. Again, depending on if you want a bunch of landfall triggers. But the sorcery side will be absolute money most of the time. Oh, I get this massive creature that I haven't been able to draw another copy of in this game, and I'll just get it out of my graveyard. Expect these to hit a battlefield near you in the coming weeks. Alright, Kazandu Mammoth. This guy is definitely a mammoth. 1 and 2 green for a 3/3 elephant. It has landfall, and when a land ETBs, this gets +2/+2 till end of turn. And it also is Kazandu Valley as a land on the other side. So 3/3s for 3 have at certain times in Magic's history in green been very playable. A card that can be a 3/3 for 3 normally, and some turns it can be a 5/5 for 3. Going to see play, and it all being able to double as a land late game. Oh hey, I got 3 elephants out. I don't, may not need the 4th one. Let's just make my guys big and swing it. Yeah, I expect to be registering a few of these in the near future. Alright, Kalani Ambush. 2 and a green, instant Fight Club, and then back is a land. Um, so this is also one that could be construed as playable. I think some of the other ones are better than this one, um, but again, most of them are a little bit cheaper. Usually one in a green or just a single green on um, prey upon. Um, but having the land on the other side gives you a little extra flexibility when it comes to that. Because this may not be something you want to play early because they don't have any creatures. Alright, Tangled Fluorohedron, 2 mana, 1/1 elemental, taps for a green, or you can play it as a land. So again, this is another one that is very playable in a constructed format. Standard typically, older formats notwithstanding. Um, but this gives you options. So if your opponent is playing a control deck, maybe you don't want to play it as a creature, you will play it as a land and go the slow route. However, if your opponent's playing a aggressive deck that may not be running a lot of removal, then playing this on 2 to ramp you to your 4-drop is perfectly acceptable. And it does give you that dynamic, right? Because this can attack and block and tap for mana if you need it, or if you just don't have the lands. You kept a one lander with a couple of double face cards. Get you options in a pinch. Alright, Turn Timber Symbiosis. 7 mana sorcery. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield. If that card has converted mana cost 3 or less, it enters the battlefield with 3+1/+1 counters on it. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And on the back side, it enters play tapped unless you pay 3 life. Or as I like to say, enters the battlefield, it bolts you, or it comes into play tapped and taps for a green. So this whole cycle has had power. The red one is going to see play. I thought the white one was the one that was most underpowered, but I'm starting to come around to that one is just good too. The black one is good. The blue one is I guess the questionable one as far as being able to set up the spell side. This one drops, you can either drop some massive behemoth that costs 7 mana or more, or you can put a relatively smaller creature into play and make it bigger with the 3+1/+1 counters on it. Or getting you to play an untapped land. I've seen lists with that's running each of these mythic cards / lands in the deck just to help with untapped lands that also has some massive value later. We'll see what turns out if it ends up being I won't say game breaking, but at least playable to the point that they're worth inclusion consistently. Alright, Vastwood Fortification. So this is the one I was talking about that I thought was a better deal than the one that scaled based on party. You get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, instant speed, 1 green, no questions. But also doubles as a land, not a basic land, on the other side. So You get quite a bit of value. You can play this once again in your counters strategy, um, and also gives you the option of playing a land tapped if you absolutely need it. Because this is usually going to get more than just 1+1+1 counter, based across the number of bodies and the number of cards that actually do ridiculous things in that deck. Alright, that is my review of the green cards in Zendikar Rising. I've got one more of these videos to do, and it's going to be over the multicolor, the colorless artifacts, and the lands. You can check that out later. So if you visit our website at adgaming.net, you can use that code below, 5th Dimension, for 5% off any order of $5 or more. Please don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. We are Alternate Dimensions, your dimension for fun, and we'll see you in the next one.